see what's happening there. Hi, it's Joy Foster, founder of Tech Pixies and the host of the Sparkle and Thrive podcast. And today I am delighted to be joined by Liz Taylor. She's one of our Tech Pixie alumni, also a member of our Level Up Mastermind, and she has been involved in the Dream Builder program in the last year. So Liz has a superpower, and that is helping people through grief. And of course, as we head towards Christmas, this is a time period where for a lot of people, grief crops up in many different ways, expected and unexpected. So I wanted to bring her on to talk about that. So Liz, thank you for being here, and tell us a little bit about how you came to be someone that helps people manage and work through the grief that they face in life.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you for having me today. And for helping, other people at the same time. I think that's what's really key. So I had that thing that a lot of people have, where I had a number of losses in consecutive waves, I think is the expression. In fact, I have a painting on my landing that a friend of mine bought for me a few years in, which is basically all the turbulent waves, and then behind the waves is the still sea. And he always used to say to me that at some point the sea will be calmer, because I lost my mum, my dad, my brother, and a really good friend of mine through death in the space of 3 years. But I also, and I think it's important to remember that grief is loss of all kinds. It isn't always about death, although of course it can be. And I also discovered that my husband, who I adored, had been living a double life, basically, and I lost my home. And then I was also forced out of my job. So you get to the point where you lose everything. I lost everything, if that makes sense. Everything that was normal at that time. And through that, I discovered what I needed, and I found meaning from that pain, and decided that I was going to help others. So I then retrained in counselling and in law of wills and probate, and set up a holistic service for helping people with everything from grief to getting ready, to the legal aspects and the emotional aspects after someone dies.
Well, and you've been helping my husband, Tim, and I get our affairs in order. We definitely are thankful for the time that we've had with you weekly, just going through the things that we need to do to prepare to make sure that our family is in a good place no matter what happens. Obviously, you hope for the best, but you're 100% right. Grief comes in so many different ways, and it's not just death. It also has to do with, you can have losses of friendship, you can have losses of job, of a home, of security. And I do think at Tech Pixies, we have a fair number of women who have had and faced those challenges. And so you've been a real blessing to our community. And I know many members of our community who have had the pleasure and honor of working with you through their grief. What are some of the things that people need to know about grief, either as someone who's helping someone through it or as someone who's going through it? I had a situation really recently where some very devastating news came through, and I was questioning, how do I reach out to this person to let them know I'm thinking of them? Because I remember when my dad died, people just didn't know what to say, and this is a sad situation for this family, but it's sometimes people just don't know what to say, and maybe some guidance on what we can say, especially at the Christmas time. Do people want to hear from us? Do they not want to hear from us? All that important information that we need to process as we're also going into heightened emotions anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
I think the first thing to emphasize for everybody is that everybody's grief or reaction to loss is going to be unique. And what works for me at this stage in my midlife may be very different to you, and may be very different to the next person. I think also we need to remember that we have a tendency to think of it in terms of Western culture. And what we do now, a little bit, is that we do talk about it a bit more than we perhaps used to do. But of course, in other cultures, they will have other ways of dealing with loss and grief. And so I think, first of all, it's really important to just kind of step back and think one rule does not fit everybody. I think for people that are going through it, the first thing is to have reassurance that what they're going through is normal. I was talking to a lady last week, and she just didn't feel like she was normal anymore. And actually, her reactions were emotional. You know, she had emotional reactions, but she was having physical reactions. And that can be sleeplessness or can't stop sleeping. You know, it can be overeating or not eating. Or people suffer pain. You know, they can suddenly have loads of pain and they think, where's all this pain come from? And it's probably the grief that's kind of, you know, not being processed and stuck inside. I like to introduce the concept of an iceberg. And if you think about it, when you're at a party, you know, you go around the room and you can see all the activity going on, the kind of, you know, what's going on for that person, what's going on in that little group. You know, you get this, oh, what's going on there? I know what's going on there. The thing with grief is that it's a bit like an iceberg, in that what we see and how we react may be only the tip of the iceberg. But what we're really going through is probably hidden well underneath. And everybody will have a different iceberg. So in a family, you could have, I remember one man a young man that I was supporting, he became a flat pack furniture expert because he threw himself into building flat pack furniture, where his wife was crying all the time. And the two of them hadn't realized that their reactions and process were very different. And through talking with me, him talking with me, you know, it helped them to understand that their reactions were different and to communicate. So I think listening to our friends and really listening and being comfortable with the listening and where that person is. You know, how many times do people say to you, be strong? You know, when people say, be strong, you know, you can do this, you know, you're a strong person. But actually, that's saying for you, you're saying it to the person because you want them to be, and you're putting your feelings onto that person. Be strong. Don't bring your tears to me. You know, you're a strong person. You're going to cope with this. And I think it's really important that we can manage being with people where they're at, and also people being able to say where they're at. And you know, if someone phones and says, "How are you?" do you tell them? Do you say, "Actually, I'm feeling really sad today," or "I'm having a really bad day," or do we say, "Oh, I'm fine"? And then also the person that's phoning, are they ready to hear, actually that person isn't fine? So we get into this kind of grief. Grief is an emotional roller coaster. You know, we're up and down. We've got physical reactions, we've got emotional reactions. And then, of course, the processing of it is, you know, with other people is an emotional roller coaster. We think that the people that are going to really support us will, and of course, sometimes they can't. And it may be they just don't physically or at that point in their lives feel able to, but it doesn't mean to say that they're not our friends anymore. But also we may come into contact with new people in our lives that can help. And I think it's being open and knowing, and it's tough, acknowledging that it is really tough and that we're all unique, but trying to understand what's good for us, what would work for us as people, and making sure we let people know if we feel we can do that. But I know it's really hard, and that's easier said than done.
And that is so true. And I think, you know, as I reflect, I mean, obviously on these podcasts, when I'm interviewing people, that you sort of reflect and relate it back to your own life, as I know people who are listening to this will be reflecting and relating it back to their own lives. You know, when my dad died, when you get to the funeral part, you've done a lot of the crying, and then you're almost then having to support everyone else who's come, to sort of grieve, and they haven't been thinking about it every day like you have. And I remember having that weird feeling at the funeral where I was actually like, I couldn't cry another tear, at that point. And I obviously had my moments, later and since, but it was interesting as people are coming up to you at the funeral, really upset because they're sort of, they may not have been thinking about it as much as you have been. And I think you're right. It's this understanding that people react in different ways at different times. And and also just, and we talk a lot at Tech Pixies about holding space. And I think that holding space is sort of that non-judgmental listening, just being able to let someone say what they need to say. I had a friend who, in a funny way, she wasn't grieving the loss of a person, but she was grieving the loss of the ability to speak freely about her opinions on, not wearing masks, not having a COVID vaccine. She was very adamant that, we should not have masks, we should not have vaccines. And in a world where you basically got crucified if you said that out loud, right? And I was at her home, and she just needed a space to say the stuff that she wanted to say and not have anyone put any judgment on it. Whether I agreed with her or I didn't agree with her, I held space for her to just be able to express herself. And in expressing herself, she was, she felt that relief. And that's where she could, she said to me, whether you agree with me or you don't agree with me, I appreciate that you gave me the space to just speak, and I think there's a gift in that. And obviously we have to be emotionally ready and not charged by what someone else is saying or going through, to deal with that.
And also, Joy, I'd say not trying to fix, because we have a society where we press the button and we think we're going to fix it. We take a tablet and we're going to fix it. What I say to people, grief is not it's not lineal. It doesn't start and it doesn't finish. People can be scared about that because they think, am I always going to feel like that? And like I am now. And I will say to people, no, you're not. But actually, our response is an action-based. It's not passive. So if we want to sit and be passive, things won't change, but we have a choice. And when someone first dies, if I'm thinking of people of this Christmas, they're coming up to the first Christmas. When someone first dies, they will say to you, most people, and again, I want to be really careful saying, I'm not labeling, I'm not generalizing, but in my experience, and I've been working with people now since 2016, most people will say that their life is just grief. There's nothing else in it. They wake up in the morning, you get 30 seconds of that feeling of thinking life's normal, and all of a sudden the wave hits and you realize, no, it's not. And one morning you might get down to the kettle and put the kettle on before the wave hits. Another day, it might be a few hours. But at the beginning, it's very much that is life, because you are dealing with all the effects of your emotions, and in some cases, the legal and financial impact of of someone that is close to them has died. They may be having to close down that person's life. So grief is not only the kind of emotional stuff that's going on, it's the tasks of mourning. They've got to sell that house. They've got to, is there a will? They've got to apply for probate, and people don't realize that all this is going on. I've just been supporting a lady, and her husband died over a year ago, and it's been a full-time job, literally. I mean, every day, she's had something to deal with, and the people around her don't understand. They're like, well, why aren't you going out, etc. So grief is all consuming. And gradually, as we go through those tasks of mourning, there'll be less of them because we'll have dealt with things. But there'll always be the anniversaries, and there'll always be those moments, those triggers. So you might be walking around the supermarket with your trolley, and you put something in it, and you're reminded that was, someone's favorite food. Or in my case, and if she's listening, she'll remember this. So I was with my friend and her teenage daughters, and we'd gone to the garden centre. And she'd gone off to look for something, and all of a sudden a piece of music came on, and I screamed, I know I'm, and she heard me from the other side of the garden centre. She came rushing over. She grabbed me and she shouted to the kids, we're going, we're going. And I got taken out into the car park. I sat in the trolley park, literally sobbing, because that piece of music had triggered a memory.
Mm.
And these things, so the triggers are always there. But when it comes to anniversaries, what I always say to people is, what is there another way that you can do things? So in my case, Christmas became too difficult, really. So I started celebrating Thanksgiving. And that stems from the
Mm.
fact that my best friend lives in California, so I understand what Thanksgiving is. But what I started to do is I started to have friends around for Thanksgiving dinner. And Thanksgiving became a time to thank all my friends for supporting me and still having the turkey, but we didn't have the cards and the presents, etc. So I found a new meaning. I found a new tradition for me of giving thanks.
Well, by the way, Thanksgiving is actually my favorite holiday of the year. I love Thanksgiving more than Christmas, although Christmas is quite special, but Thanksgiving for me is it, and it's one of my favorites. And it's actually been one of the greatest challenges of living in England, actually, for me, because while we were in Switzerland, we would do Thanksgiving because there were quite a few Americans there, and you'd come together for Thanksgiving dinner, etc. Whereas here, it's a little bit trickier because it's always during a week that everyone's still functioning in school and everything else. But so we did have an Advent lunch at church on the weekend, and that was my ability to sort of do Thanksgiving and have that moment. But I hear you, and I love that idea of new traditions or changing things up. One thing that I do with everyone in my life who I've loved who's passed away is I tend to have almost like a spirit animal that I remember them by, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I love spirit animals, and so my dad is a hummingbird, and actually when I was at the Cotswold Wildlife Park, I found a wooden hummingbird, and I've got his ring, which he wore on in the hummingbird, and it sits on my desk, and it's like he's just sort of always there. And I have my aunt who passed away. I always, whenever I see a robin, the day she died, I painted a robin. And so I have always, whenever I see a robin, I think of her. And with my, with Tim's mother, the day she died, I painted an owl. So I have an owl. Every time I wear owls, I think of her. I have an owl dress and owl earrings and an owl necklace. And so, I think that's something I've done, for people in my life where I've an animal has come to mind, and there's beautiful traits about those animals, and that's usually what reminds me of them. So I think that's a good idea to come up with either a new tradition or a way of remembering someone with a really positive so that when you see that thing you have a pleasant feeling about it. But I know what you mean by the random things that completely throw you off. I have a couple songs will do that, because it's almost like songs are like a smell, there's something that you listen to during a period of time, and you usually listen to it over and over again during that period of time. So when that song comes on, it can really trigger you. So that's really interesting what you said.
Yeah. And also I call it continuing bonds. So how we continue the bond with the person. And I think this is the thing that we have to adjust to. And, we, from a young age, we're taught to control, we must control things. And of course, death, we have no control. Not really. I mean, it happens. We all live in a world where a lot of people think it's never going to happen to me. Which is why, I have a lot of people who say, why do you do this? Why are you living in this space? What would you want to be sad for all the time? I'm not sad all the time. I have found meaning through my grief by helping other people. And so I've reframed it. And a bit like with continuing bonds, for some people, it might be something that they wear. In your case, it's animals. I have my dad's scarf. But the strange thing is, my brother who died, gave that scarf to my dad at his last Christmas. And, it's there, and I sometimes wear it, and I used to wear it all the time, and now I wear it sometimes. A friend of mine, her family always sang the Messiah at the Albert Hall. And as a family, that all of them did, they had, sopranos, altos, basses, etc. And when their father died, they stopped doing it. But what we've done is we've reframed that by now we do it together. And the Messiah was one of my dad's favourite piece of music. And so we go to the Albert Hall every Christmas. And well, it was November this year, Remembrance Sunday. And we sing the Messiah along with 2,000 other people. And we've got a continuing bond with our fathers. And but we've reframed it into a new tradition. So, we need to, what I always say to people often as well, the build up to an event can often be worse than the day itself. And it's made me think of a young man another man who I supported, and that was someone who they'd got baby twins, and one of them had died. So they had the two things going on. They had a birthday to celebrate and a death day, as they were his words. And him and his wife were planning this. What were they going to do? And this is what I say to people about Christmas now. Think about what you might want to do, but remember you can change it. And on the day of both of those anniversaries, that couple changed their mind, because he and I had the conversation, and I said to him, when you wake up on that day, just sit and think, what do we really want to do today? And is it what we've planned, or do we feel like we need to do something else? And a lot of people have this thing, families and friends say, oh, you can't be on your own for Christmas. Actually, some people might find it easier. Being in a crowd of people can be as lonely as being on your own. And I also say to people, what about the other 364 days of the year? And actually saying that, it brought a lump to my throat, because I had the conversation with a man yesterday. It's going to be his first Christmas without his wife. He's dreading it. And we talked about what he had done and what he might do now and what the options were. But I think what I would say to people out there that have got friends that may be coming up to this is ask them. Don't leave. The worst thing is having this build up and feeling like you're a spare part and you have nowhere to go. And so don't leave it. Don't think another friend is going to ask that person. Can you accommodate your friend or your family member for Christmas? Would they like to be with you? What would work for them? My friend, two of my friends were always very good at making sure that I knew I could go to them on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Sometimes not always, but generally. But if I was with them and then I suddenly needed to disappear, they would know that I needed to disappear. And they would come and check on me, after half an hour or so. And then eventually I would come back. But it's also knowing that being in that crowd and that reminder can be overwhelming. So I think it's really important for people to know what they think they need, talk it through with other people, find out what the options were. Bank holidays, I never used to go out. I absolutely, and this is what I mean, it's not just Christmas. I hated bank holidays because, everyone was having a good time. People were going away. They were with their families. They were with their friends. And it magnifies the people that aren't in your life. And even though I've now built a life around my grief and I have other people in it, I still miss the people that aren't there. I still am reminded of them. And that's why, this, but we'll share it, that, I've started another tradition, which is I now have a real Christmas tree. Around the anniversary of my dad's death, because he died in December, we could never afford a real Christmas tree as children. And so I thought, well, what could I do? to remember him and remember them, actually. And so a friend of mine comes and we go off and we buy a tree. I put the roof down in the Mini, the tree sticks out the roof, and we drive along and we put the tree up together, and it's become a new tradition. And this year she's coming. She said, I'm coming for your dad's anniversary. And that's what we do. So I think it's a snapshot would be consider different ways of doing things. Find other ways to remember if you can, and adapt and speak to your friends, and remember you can change your mind.
Those are all really, really powerful, and I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that wisdom and experience with us. So I just want to make sure people know where to find you if they want to reach out to you. Of course, you provide grief support, and you also help people do their own planning in terms of getting things in order. I know we're experiencing that right now for ourselves. My husband's almost 53 and I'm 43. So we feel like we're finally growing up and dealing with some of the things that, and I think you're right. It's like you almost don't deal with it because you think, well, if I don't deal with it, it's not going to happen. But the reality is there's two guarantees in life, right? Death and taxes. And we know this. And there's sort of a running joke in the pastor world of the pastor who suddenly wakes up and realizes he's going to die.
Yeah. I think thank you and I really admire you both for giving this a go, because I know it's hard, and I know that it brings up a lot of stuff, and that fear of death. I have a friend who was married for over 30 years, and her husband, they'd never done a will, and he didn't want to do one. And, for her, it was really, really important. They didn't have power of attorneys either, but they've now done all of them. And what it was for him was, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that, death is a fear for a lot of people. They don't want to talk about it. And in his case, having a will was when his mother came to him as a teenager to say that she was dying. She had cancer and she was dying. So there was nothing else for him other than that memory. And that's why he didn't want to engage in that process, because that's what it meant to him. I had a conversation with some people last week, and they were, oh, we're not going to die. It doesn't matter. It's all going to go to him. It doesn't. And I get a little bit, I get quite upset and anxious and a bit irritated with people that take that view. I understand. I have empathy for the fear. But I was talking to 3 ladies on Friday that are going through the same program with me that you are, which is our Before I Go program, where we help everybody get their affairs in order. And we were talking about funerals and what they would want for their funerals. And what came out of it as we were talking about. So here's a question for you. Who do you think, and for the audience, who do you think the funeral is for? Is it for you, or is it for the people left behind?
That's a great question.
It is a great question. And everybody will feel differently about it. But what I can say is, having organised a number of funerals and having organised where my mum and dad had said roughly what they wanted, although it was very hard, I had to stand up and speak in the pulpit, which I was petrified of doing. At least I knew that we were doing something along the lines of what they wanted. With my brother, I hadn't got a clue. And the conflict of everybody's emotions and everybody's input became very difficult. One person wanted a dark coffin, one person wanted a light, one person wanted him in a blue shirt, one person wanted him in a pink.
Oh, I see. So by saying what you want, you actually are relieving a lot of the stress and questions that come up later.
Exactly.
And
the thing is, when you go to the funeral director for the first time and they ask you these questions, I'd never been asked those questions. What clothing are you going to put your brother in, and what you can't have in a coffin, etc. Does he want to be cremated? Does he want to be buried? Well, we haven't got a clue. I remember when my aunt died, her and her husband were very religious. He'd been a Methodist minister for most of his adult life. and they had a huge faith. And on the day that she died, he phoned my dad and he said, George, do you know whether Nellie wants to be buried or cremated? Because they'd never had the conversation. And, what was her favourite Bible reading, George? And, what was her favourite hymn? And that's because he was in such emotional shock. He couldn't think. And I think this is the other thing is we are talking in a place of a kind of intellectual process right now in this chat. But when people die, we're not in that place.
Yeah, that's so true.
That we've got brain fog, we don't know. And, in some faiths, they have to organise the ritual immediately. And so anyway, these ladies, we were talking about our funerals. And actually, interestingly, today, Kathy Burke has started a podcast she's interviewing her friends about their funerals, which I think I'm going to listen into. I'm sure it's going to be a laugh. Well, I think that's the other thing is we can have grief with respectful humour.
Yes.
And empathy. But what I suddenly said to these ladies, I said, you know what? We're all grievers. We have all grieved. We are still grievers. And the reason it's important to us is because we are the ones that have been left behind. So we know how important it is. And there was like this light, like you just said, a light bulb moment. We all went, oh, why have we never thought of that before, Liz? This light bulb. Well, of course, that's why we're interested in this, because in fact, 3 of us are grief recovery specialists.
Yeah.
And, in that work, what we teach people is tools for dealing with loss in an action way and, not in a passive way. And it is we look at the whole loss history. But yeah, so I think it's important that, yes, we might fear these things and we may not mind. We may have a really supportive family around us that think, actually, I'm going to leave it to them because the funeral is for them. But we might also make it easier for them if we have at least talked about what's important or even talked about what's not important.
Yeah. Well, I did laugh when you said, when we were talking about, our funerals a little bit, and I was laughing. I said, well, I've lived all over the world, so it's going to have to be streamlined virtually. My husband laughed, but I mean, in a real sense, it's like, if you want to bring everyone you love together, and they're all over the world, the best way to do that is probably going to be virtually.
Exactly. And actually, Joy, because that is one thing that has come out of the pandemic, is that, a lot of crematoriums are now streaming funerals. It doesn't always work, but, they are doing that. And I think, that is a change. And grief is a change. It's, if we think about how we've dealt with change throughout our lives, grief is another one. And it can be devastating, but also it can be enlightening, and we can get meaning from that pain. And yeah, I think, my heart goes out to people that are facing Christmas for the first time or second time or, 20th time. And also, there are 365 days in the year, not just one.
Yes, we must remember that. Well, Liz, I want to say thank you so much. I've just put into the comments your website, but if you want to reach out to Liz, you can find her at emotional-rescue.org.uk. Liz, thank you for your time today and all of your advice and your experience. You're a blessing to all of us, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you.